Okay.
This meeting of the Rolling Meadows City Council's Committee of the Whole is hereby called to order. There are 4 items on the agenda, and the chair is not aware of any reason to jockey any items around. Is there anything the chair is unaware of? Good, then we can actually have an agenda that stays the way it's printed for probably the first time in a little while. So item number 1 is the proposed budget. It's item number 1 tonight, but it's of course not the first time we've talked about it. We've had dribs and drabs all the way along. And so now that it's been out and people have been able to review it on the website and in the library and all that other kind of stuff, the rubber starts to hit the road tonight. Mr. Krumstock, am I correct from the council action summary that if we can give a little direction on property tax, that'll be sufficient for this evening unless people have some kind of early intention that they want to signal here at the table?
That is correct. That's the direction that we're looking for the first meeting.
All right. So then please feel free to wander into any item for the budget that you feel you're going to be looking at later on as the budget develops over the next couple of months. But know that the staff is looking for direction on at least that one item this evening. Therefore, Mr. Krumstock, are you going to put this ball in the air?
I'm going to do the introduction, and then obviously Finance Director Melissa Gallagher. We do have a PowerPoint, but the quick summary that I do want to remind people is that, again, as you mentioned before, we are looking for the direction for the property tax levy. The property tax levy that is in the proposed budget is the same one that we discussed back in June. But obviously, as you've seen in the budget, we do need to know that the first item actually does come up next Tuesday. And this budget that you do see before you, the schedule that you see before you actually talks about November 22nd, having all the pieces completed and passed, but there are items that do come up as they usually do at the biggest point. And for residents at home, obviously property tax is discussed, but at the same point in time, use of reserves in the general fund is actually used for pensions. And the other part that if people look at, and this will be the second year in a row for a budget, there's a manager's hold. We're still in union negotiations. We're still having those discussions going on, and that's why you do see a large hold for 2017. Obviously, we don't know where that will end, and obviously with all the other pieces that are out there. The other point that we do want to bring up, since June, obviously IMRF has changed a little bit, and there's a reallocation that's actually part of the budget that you see overall. And the only other parts that we do have before I do turn it over is, again, just reiterating our debt service. In 2017, we do finish one of our debts that does come off that is on the property tax. So in 2018 budget, we will be talking about some reallocation. But that's our snapshot as of right now. If the city goes out for a bond or anything else, that would change part of the perspective that we actually have. And then obviously the general fund is our biggest fund. That's what most people actually delve into. Obviously what we talk about is that we're still within our parameters, the 15 to 30% for the fund balance with this budget, even with the allocation of some reserves. And obviously one thing that we're trying to do with this budget is increase the amount going into our uncompensated absences. It goes from the $200,000 to the $300,000. So again, we're trying to show to any bond agency or anybody else out there that we're still making strides into some of our pieces. We do have at least one fund that is negative, and that's still our TIF. And again, everything that we talk about with everybody else, that does show it going positive before it actually expires. And the other part of with that, in 2023 or 2026 when it actually expires, whatever actually comes into that TIF across the street, that would be distributed to all the taxing bodies. So again, with that, those are the quick summaries that we have. But again, I do turn this over to Finance Director Melissa Gallagher, who we do have about 13 slides to go through.
Ms. Gallagher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Krumstock.
not to spend too much on it, but I do want to just mention that as an intro, the budget process does really begin in January, and we start the process in January and carry it all the way through until we, of course, present the budget to the City Council. The City Council does see pieces of that along the way, along with budget parameters that are usually presented in March or February, and then obviously a CIP that's presented in August. But for the proposed budget, that was delivered with the City Council packet of August 23rd. And as the Mayor mentioned, it's also available at the city's website. It's here at City Hall and the library. We have completed, the city manager and myself, completed initial one-on-one budget meetings with City Council members. And then as Mr. Krumstock mentioned, there is a public hearing for the tax levy for the city and the library, and that will take place at next week's City Council meeting, September 27th. So any feedback from City Council is important from tonight's meeting. And then we have the public hearing for the city's budget and the library's budget, which will take place at the October 11th meeting. And all of those hearing notices have been published in a local newspaper. So an achievement for this year, for 2016, the Government Finance Officers Association awarded the city with the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for fiscal year 2016. Years ago, more than 10 years ago, the city did apply for that award. And for the first time in 10 years, the city actually submitted this year for the award for the 2016 budget. It does mean that the city does meet nationally recognized guidelines for effective budget presentations, and it also means that it shows a bit of a commitment on the city's part for staff and management, because we do meet the highest principles of government budgeting. And it also is a win-win when we go out to talk with credit rating agencies, because of the fact that this does show we have an achievement to talk about. Our budget planning calendar is in the packet itself, but we do want to mention that we do kick it off tonight with the CAL meeting. And as Mr. Krumstock mentioned, that the November 22nd is the date that we typically wrap things up around that time frame, with approving the city's tax levy and adopting the city budget and accepting the library's budget. Obviously, there are public hearings that we mentioned and discussions that surround that time frame. Likes to go forward, backward. There we go. This is a graphic, and it does show where we, as the City of Rolling Meadows, do stand in terms of the portion of the city's tax bill. The City of Rolling Meadows represents 15 cents out of every property tax dollar, with the majority of the property tax bill related to schools. It's a good graphic just to keep in mind that every 15 cents out of every dollar. And this relates to the property tax levy for the 2014 tax levy for the 2015 budget. We're always a year in arrears in that. As Mr. Krumstock mentioned, there are, here's the slide for the debt service. There are 2 bonds that are still part of the tax levy itself. We have one of the bonds that is a portion of the entire bond for the 2012 tax levy, and those 2 bonds do expire in 2017 and 2018. The largest in green there that does go out to 2023 is the bond for the debt service that we do pay until 2023, and that is funded through the general fund. Obviously, these are things that we'll be looking at and forecasting out as we're looking at improvements and infrastructure improvements going forward. This is a slide directly from the budget itself. This is the proposed tax levy as proposed in the 27 budget. Of course, this is pending City Council review. A couple highlights here. Year-over-year increase of $974,735 at a 7.6% increase. Now remember that this was presented at the June Committee of the Whole meeting to City Council after the audit presentation. What we knew at that time was the actuarial number for police and fire pension. The IMRF actuarial number came at later date, and that's why there's a reduction in that year over year. So there's really nothing new in terms of the whole dollar amount change. And of course, this is open to City Council review and discussion. But we present this slide as it's shown in the proposed budget just for review and discussion. This fund balance summary is taken directly from the City Council packet tonight. It does show where the beginning estimated fund balance will be for 2017. Of course, that is an estimate. It's unaudited. We outline every single fund, beginning with the general fund all the way to health insurance, revenues, expenditures, as Mr. Krumstock mentioned, the manager's hold, and then the ending estimated fund balance for 2017. What you'll see here is really a lot of capital being done. When we look at the utilities fund, when we look at the local road fund, year over year, there is a significant increase for capital expenditures. And of course, any questions that we can take along the way, but this is just a snapshot. This is an important slide where, of course, staff and management were always looking and reviewing the local government distributive revenues, which are revenues just directly distributed from the state of Illinois, ones that we're always monitoring and making sure that we're ensuring that in case something changes, we notify City Council immediately. Income tax, local use tax, and the personal property replacement tax are through major revenue sources that do come into the general fund. Those on the screen here will show a historical trend from 2011 all the way to 2017 in the proposed budget. The motor fuel tax is a state motor fuel portion that is distributed from the state of Illinois on a per capita basis to the city and also considered a local government distributed revenue. We do show this as a slide to show the trend line over time. The general fund year over year change in revenues and expenditures are shown in this slide. This is also a slide or a page in the budget itself. You will see that based on the presentation that Mr. Krumstock had mentioned, that there is a manager's hold due to ongoing labor negotiations. Based on the proposed budget, all in, there's a 23% fund balance expenditure. When we talk about fund balance, we're talking about a range based on the fund balance policy of 15 to 30% of fund balance to expenditures. So all in for 2017, unassigned fund balance available to the city of Rolling Meadows is estimated at $7.5 million and 23% of expenditures. We're going to flip over really to the next largest fund, which is the utilities fund. And just at a high level review as well, the change in year over year is displayed at the screen here. When we talk about utility rates, we talk about how we're set up currently and what the increase is year over year. As discussed at the budget parameter discussion at the committee of the whole meeting in February, and as presented in the CIP, the increase proposed is at 7% for water, 5% for sewer, and 5% for stormwater, with no increase for the refuse rate. And those are outlined at the above slide here. What does that mean for a residential water bill? If you use about 8,000 gallons of usage per month, that's about a $7.10 increase from the current rates right now, and that's a monthly increase based on 8,000 gallons. This is a very high-level, brief overview of a very large document. So what we're trying to do tonight, though, is really look at what other changes the City Council is looking at, maybe some other questions. We're also looking at, as a reminder, that the proposed tax levy hearing is coming up, as Mr. Krumstock mentioned, that any input and direction from the City Council tonight is beneficial, and then any other items that might be beneficial to discuss. And I'm happy to take any questions or any other items.
All right, then I already know the answer to my question, and everybody with a green folder for the one-on-one meetings knows the answer to the question too. But could I ask, in this particular format, we discussed at a previous meeting the idea of the numbers 2033 and 2041 keep floating around in terms of the year for fully funding the pensions. And this council has done the right thing for a number of years now. When the date was extended to 2041, we said thank you very much for the supposed breathing room, but that's at long-term expense, and so we don't want to take it. We'd rather stay with 2033. And so because of the situations that we've seen with the fund balance policy and stuff, it seemed like a reasonable proposal, and so I had asked, what if we said 2041 funding would go in the property tax only, And then the 2033 adjustment, the council would have to suck it up from the budget and say, that difference that we're hanging our hat on, we have to find somewhere in this budget to not raise the property tax higher than it needs to go. And so again, I know in our green folders, we all got a sheet, but could you lay out those numbers for us if the council were to take the increment from other parts of the budget instead of doing 2033 target funding in the property tax? What would that look like?
I can actually answer that
Sure.
because the difference is $362,137. What would that do to the 7.6? It drops it down to 4.8, so under that 5% that we actually have. How staff has looked at the numbers is we looked at that 362,187 number equally distributed, but also using fund balance reserves to actually be utilized in the general fund to keep it at that amount that we were looking at overall from the June discussion.
So I guess I would say based on those results, I still stand by the idea. I think it's a solid idea for the council to consider that we can still do the right thing as far as pension funding goes without having to sock it all in the property tax. And I certainly think that the even distribution that Mr. Krumstock mentioned could be one way to take care of this. I'm certainly open to hearing other ways. But I think since it's a council decision, I think the council should have to find the increment somewhere in the budget instead of laying it out there in the property tax. So I think I'll hold some of the other things I have for now because I think other folks are along the same lines of some of them. I'll let other folks take those, and anything that doesn't quite get covered, I might take the microphone again before we're done. But for the one item that we really need to give the staff a decision on tonight, I think it would be very important because we would get the double benefit of having that increase be below 5%, which I've spoken about before. I know is a level that lots of people further down in the lowerarchy, as C.S. Lewis says, at those levels of government, they pay a lot of attention to that. And as the ongoing struggle about property taxes goes on, seeing municipalities above the 5% is part of what's driving the discussion. And I don't think we need to participate in making the problem worse. So as I say, that's my only comment for the moment, although I might come back later. Is there anybody else who would like to comment, signal intention, ask questions, or other? Mr. Banger.
Thank you. I think from the beginning I've said I'm perfectly fine with the budget as is. I understand the magic of getting a tax increase below 5%. I just see a need to pay it sooner rather than later, and I don't have a crystal ball, but looking down even these next couple of years, we continue to, I think we've done a great job with our streets programs, but we continue, even if we say we're aggressive, we've got a long road ahead of us, so to speak. And I think there are things, we've talked about this before, there are things we know, there are things we don't know, and I'd rather have this year us be aggressive and take it easy next year. We're going to have some debt falling off of the map, and I think we'll have a lot more room to maneuver if that's the case next year. And I guess those are a few of the reasons that I'm fine with it as staff proposed. As the discussion unfolds, I might change my mind, but as of right now, looking at these numbers, I'm perfectly content with the way they are. Thank you.
Further discussion around the council. Mr. Praetna.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I've brought forth, and now is the time, we had spoken about the fund balance, and we had this figure that we came up with that was 22.5 as we've gone through the budget, the fund balance as a percent of expenditures. For 2017, they're looking at it being approximately 23%. That's just their estimate. And I would like to see us look at, since that is reserves, taking some of that 1%, 2%, 3% and putting that towards the pensions. And that way, the other strategy that you mentioned is there, but this is, I think it will help us, and it is giving back some of the reserves, the tax money from the taxpayers. So I've signaled early and often, so just putting that out there. And
So then just to clarify the point from before, you're talking about dropping that midpoint down lower to something around perhaps 20 or
20%,
Fair
and then maybe staff could tell us what that 3% difference would be.
Sure.
We can actually give you that too. We did run certain numbers, obviously from our discussions, and where we're showing it at 23% right now. And I'm just going to do full numbers. But if you were going to drop down to 22%, sorry, I don't have the spreadsheet with me. But if you're going to do 22%, the difference would be $321,574.
I'm sorry.
$321,574. If you're going to drop it down, to 21%, you would drop it down by $649,527. And
which is roughly the same
times
number
two.
times 2.
right,
Yes.
I'm just using the numbers for people who are writing. So
Thank you. It's
For-
out there.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And perhaps we'll box another day. Correct. Further discussion around the council. Mr. Judd.
Just for starters, I mean, I'm fine with the 7.6 or 9, just for the simple fact is this is strictly pensions. We're not, taking any money from the residents for anything else except for pensions. And this was done strictly, not even because we did something wrong, or Springfield for once, or even, the unions asking for more. It's strictly a mortality issue. So this isn't something that's going to happen every year. I'm comfortable with it just because next year it won't be that same number. So I don't have a problem with it. I'd prefer lower, but we don't derive the actuarial number. So
Further discussion around the table. Then if there is none, I guess having heard a couple of the gentlemen and thinking they have perfectly fair points, I guess I feel the need to stand up a little bit more and hope I can get a few more votes for dropping this thing down, because I believe that's absolutely correct. As Mr. Judd pointed out, the main driver here is this change in mortality. But I just happen to take that fact the opposite direction. I take it in the direction of, therefore, since it's artificial in a manner that I think is bordering on ridiculous, I don't feel a particular need to step immediately up to the plate and follow it. I think that people are becoming far too comfortable with numbers changes just meaning everybody around here pays more. I also think it's a perfectly fair point to say there will be more room next year, perhaps, to be able to do stuff. I just also take that point the opposite way and say I would much rather use that stuff for some of the projects that we keep talking about. $300,000 is real money. There's no doubt about it. But the pain that it causes this council to just find another $300,000 in the budget is sure a lot smaller than the pain that some people feel from the property taxes. And again, I don't think it's wise to add another city to the list of things that people who decide things in other places can point to and say, look how out of control our local communities are. We passed a PTEL 20 years ago with 5% as the theoretical cap, and they're all ignoring it. You're writing their talking points for them if we do this. And so I really do think that those facts are certainly legitimately taken in one direction, but I personally happen to take them in another direction. And I sure hope some other hands, if not voices, around the table might follow me in that direction. Further comments? Mr. Veenbos.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Barry and his staff for sitting with council members to go through this budget and come with some conclusions and answered all my questions prior to this meeting. But I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. My preference is to keep it under 5% also. I recognize and understand the property taxes that everybody's paying. I also recognize what people get in their paycheck and what the cost of living is, and my preference is to keep it below 5%.
Further discussion around the table. Ms. Majakis.
I agree with both of you, and I said that last time we discussed this, and I'm sticking with what I originally said. Thank you.
Mr. Prana again.
And that is the reason I brought up, my point is keep it under 5% because we do have some money that we can work with in reserves for this, and it is the residents' money.
And so, in other words, another way to get almost the same dollar amount, if I could follow the exact number that Mr. Crumstock was reading,
Yes.
could simply be to take that number down to 22%, which is 0.5% off of our target, would make things fairly simple. Is that the point?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that would be great, as I've said. Thank
All
you.
right. Mr. Crumstock.
Just the reminder, the draft budget, the 23% that we're talking about, does have reserves being used to make that accommodation to the 4.8. So just to put it out there. So.
Got it. Further discussion on this particular point. Mr. Banjer.
A quick question for Ms. Gallagher in terms of, we talked a lot about setting this policy, so if we're fiddling around with it, and the auditors wanted us to have that in place, are they going to freak out when we fiddle around with it?
Well, before Ms. Gallagher answers, I would say that I object to the phrase fiddling around with the policy. Nobody's suggesting fiddling around with the policy or changing it. 23% is 0.5% off of 22.5. 22% would just be 0.5% off in the other direction. This 22.5 is not some magic number that we have to hit. Plus or minus 0.5%. I object to the phrase fiddling around with the policy. Nobody's changing the policy. We're just changing the number in the budget. The policy only requires that it be between 15 and 30, and both of those numbers are. So if you wouldn't mind, if you'd still like an answer from Ms. Gallagher, I'd appreciate a different phrasing.
No, actually, that clears it up.
Okay, fair enough. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Just for
Judge.
Mr. Mayor, and we only made that 22.5. We could make it 17. We could make it 27.
That has
That's just
been
a
Mr.
soft one
Prana's,
that
correct.
we
That has been
did,
Mr.
so.
Prana's point, correct, that we could make that. You are
Right.
correct, sir.
Okay.
Any further discussion specifically on the point of Mr. Diastis?
I have heard from the residents for a long time, and I believe that we need to do all that we can do to keep the property tax under 5%. I think Mr. Prana has a good idea. I mean, knock it down from 23 to 22, and that gives you 321. And Mayor, you were looking at 362. So then we just have to find another 41,000. And the combination of the two gets us at the 4.8. So those are both good ideas in my opinion, but like I said, the people in my ward specifically that I have spoken to, lower is always better. And I understand that it's just for pensions But again, that's kind of an arbitrary number that somebody else picked up that, 10 years ago, they weren't that high, but now they are. So, I want to be under 5%. And I will work with whomever to get us there.
Further discussion around the council on this particular subject? Mr. Judd?
So let me make sure I understand this. So at the 4.8, we're going to use 360,000 from reserves.
That is correct.
And that puts us at 23% after that? So we're still at 23%
You're
if
still
we
at
use 360.
23% if you use that, because this budget does put that in.
So 360 is put in, we get 4.8, and we use 360 in reserves.
That is correct.
So we're all on the same page, right? So one of the issues I have with this is the 2033M, and I've been a strong proponent of it for a long period of time because I think it's the right thing to do. Because this number is just going to continue to go higher and higher and higher as time goes on. What I would suggest is the problem I have with going off, to me, this is a de facto going off of 2033. It's going to 2040 de facto wise, in the sense that now we have to rely on next year, whoever's sitting in our seats, to raise $360,000 to get to zero and raise whatever additional rates have to go up. So if the actuarials come out and it's 100,000 for each, you're going to have to raise 160 for or 180 for each plus 100,000. So you're at a $560,000 tax increase. And then you have to wait. And if you just say, okay, we're going to find the extra money in the budget like we did this year, we find 360 grand in the budget next year, then you got to hope the next council or the next year, you continue to find 360,000 to stay on 2033. I understand the push to get to 4.8. I would offer a compromise that leave the police and fire pension numbers exactly what they are, the 414 and the 563. And instead of reducing those by roughly $180,000 apiece, reduce the police and fire protection by $180,000. So your police and fire pension number will stay the original number 3.2 and 3.5, which keeps us on 2033 without having to find any money. The money that we found to reduce the taxes will come off the police protection and the fire protection. So we end up with the 4.8 that everybody wants, and we end up staying on 2033, as myself and other members of the council have expressed in the past that they want to stay on. So it's kind of I don't want to say a win-win for both, but it allows both to achieve what we want. And, if there's room next year and those numbers come out, the police fire come out at 100 grand apiece, and we say, okay, well, we can move, we're staying under that 5%, we're going to go $500,000. 100 and 100, you'd have 300 left. You put 150, 75 back in each one, or 150 grand back in each one. So it allows the number to stay at 2033 without any push for next year. It allows the 4.8. It doesn't change the budget in any significant manner, and allows everybody to kind of have what they're looking to get. So I would make that proposal if the push is to go 4.8. I would argue, instead of changing the number down to 233 and 382, leave them where they are and take those same numbers off police and fire.
And then just for clarification purposes, backfill the police and fire protection line items with the money that we're talking about rather than the pension ones.
Correct. So that way the pension number stays at on 2033, and we don't have to worry about what another council. That way, if we have some big number, then we can stay there next year. We're not looking for reserves that may or may not exist.
Then I would offer out, while I completely disagree with the reason you expressed for doing it, I think it's a perfectly fine place to end up. I completely disagree that to do what we're talking about would be a de facto anything when it comes to 2033, because the $2033 would still be spent, just from two different pots. And I think saying they all have to come from one pot is a distinction without a difference. I don't see a need to stand on a technicality. However, having made that argument, I think the place where you landed is perfectly appropriate to me. And if that's something that can pick up somebody's voice and pick up somebody's hand, I'm certainly willing to go along with it because I believe it's a distinction without a difference. It's 6 of one and a half dozen of the other to me, and I'm perfectly willing to go along with that. Mr. Diastis.
I was just looking at the debt payments for next year. It looks like in 2018, we will be $1.5 million to the good.
That's what I've been saying. So this whole, you have to count on a future council to, raise money, it's going to be there.
It's going to be
so
there
that's
in
why
2018. So I'm like, I understand, but the debts are going to be done. So we'll have an extra $1.5 million that will help us cover all of this, repay any of this that needs to be repaid, and put more money to the road fund. So I'm sticking with we have to be at 4.8, and I still think I like what Len said and what you said, taking those two. I understand what you said, Brad, but I think those are easier to explain and to everybody and make just as much sense.
Further discussion around the table. Mr. Krupstock.
I just want to, again, give one quick comment, and I know that we've had discussions in the past, and I understand what's being said. I just want to give you the staff / if I go to a bond council discussion. And again, I understand exactly what you're doing. The bond council is going to ask, okay, you took $500,000 from Public Works operations last year. When's your plan to return it, or do you need it? They're going to ask, okay, next year you're doing a stripping from your operations again, police and fire. So for staff-wise, and if we go before a bond or anything else, they're going to start looking at how you're stripping certain line items. But that's something that we would have to do if the council gives us that direction. The other thing is it makes it much easier when we're discussing with council or anything else like that, that we already had a plan that we used reserves last year. We would be using reserves this year. I just put it out there because obviously for Finance Director Melissa Gallagher and I, we always think about those next questions that are coming because we have to deal with the rating agencies and some of those other pieces. So, and again, not to pipe anything, but I believe that the proposed budget in front of you does do that. And as everybody has heard, we know what's dropping off in 2017. We know what the pieces look like. We know what 2018, that's why we do stress. We don't know if more debt will be coming in there, but that would be part of the discussions. Can you postpone it a little bit? We do know how the council has stated we want more to go to streets. We do know how the council has stated, and you've heard from us before about 911 and some of those other pieces. But staff-wise, I'm just giving you my two pieces because we always have to think about what kind of answer and what other pieces are we doing.
Thank you, sir. Other comments around the table? Then may I ask if we do a straw poll this way? Could we start with saying how many hands are in favor of simply in principle shooting for 4.8? And I realize that there are two mechanisms that we can vote on after that to get there. But if there aren't sufficient hands to going down to 4.8, there's no need to vote on either mechanism. I do understand that some people might say, well, whether I would be willing to do that or not might depend on which mechanism we use. But without some kind of direction that 4.8 is a goal in principle, which would allow somebody, if it couldn't be the mechanism they wanted, to then vote against it without appearing to backtrack, I think that's the way to keep it the cleanest. Is there any objection to asking first for a vote in principle on getting toward 4.8? Since I did hear voices that said they didn't feel it was necessary. And then if that has a majority of the council, then asking for a go time vote between the two mechanisms we've discussed, meaning the budget as proposed on the one hand and Mr. Judd's idea, which I also find is an acceptable alternative, on the other. Is there any objection to taking the vote in that order? Then seeing none, may I ask the council first, how many people are in favor of, in principle, trying to get the number down to 4.8% based on these numbers that we've looked at? Then in principle, that is a majority of the council. If that's the way the council is going to go, we have two methods by which to get there. The first one is the one as proposed by staff, and so I think it's only fair to ask for that hand vote first.
Wait,
And-
explain that one.
Well, it's the paperwork in the document right in front of you. And then the alternative is the one expressed by Mr. Judd, which I will again say I also find equally acceptable. So I think that's the fair way to go about it. Before we do that, is there any further discussion between the two methods? Then seeing none, how many people are in favor of achieving this goal through the budget as presented? Through the budget as presented, correct, by the manager.
But I'm missing something. Isn't this 7.6 by the manager?
Well, but the manager has clarified that what they have done, yes, that was the way that this was originally done.
Okay.
But they have already made the adjustment necessary within what's being presented to get to 4.8. So in other words, it's stick with what's here or go with the other idea, which is fine by me, but the manager has asked, we think our way of doing it is perfectly fine. Mr. Judd has asked for an alternative.
And what about Mr. Prana's way?
That's this way,
Oh,
The
okay.
budget way.
Okay. I just want to make sure I had it clear.
okay? Mr. Meadbus.
I don't have strong feelings either way, so can I vote twice?
Well, we don't live in the city of Chicago, Mr. Meadbus, and so
I work there.
unfortunately, I agree with you.
okay,
I
I
don't
got you.
have strong
Okay, I just-
feelings either, but
All
one
right,
side
all
of the
right.
fence or the
Okay.
other, please.
Just
One side of the
just
fence or
want
the
to
other.
clarify.
So may I ask again, those in favor of, let's call it the staff option, please raise your hand. That's 3. Those in favor of the operations, not pensions option. Is that a fair way to phrase it?
Right.
Those in favor of that option, please raise your hand. That is a majority of the council. Therefore, the staff, is that sufficient direction specifically on the property tax point for where to go?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Then before we leave this item, would anybody, as Mr. Prana has taken the opportunity, would anybody like to signal any other intentions? We still have 2 months until the final passage of the budget, but as always, if anybody feels there's anything that might hang them up, we'd like to know about it as early as possible. Is there any other things that people would like to raise under the general heading of the whole doggone budget? Mr. Cannon.
I would like us to consider some incremental increases in fees and in stickers.
Okay, so stickers I know is specifically a particular item. Did you have any particular fees in mind, or are you asking
building
the
fees.
staff to, the building fees?
Yes, nothing huge, just
Okay.
incremental, just to keep up with inflation, if nothing else.
Okay. Is that an intention you wish to signal this evening for further discussion, or would you actually like the council to discuss that right now? Either way is fine.
I just was offering it up. I mean, I don't really care either way, either now or sometime. If we want to talk about it now, it's fine.
Then, Ms. Gallagher, do you have a
Thank you,
preference?
Mr. Mayor. Well, actually, I just want to remind the council that last year we did do an increase in building fees last year. So I just want to make sure I understand what the direction is for us to take it back to look at incremental increases as far as cost
yeah,
of living.
So I'm not
or-
talking, just, myself, in my life, I feel like if things stay the same one year to the other, you're actually losing. I mean, I'm not asking for us to make the stickers like $40, but to keep them at 30, we're actually getting less money next year from an operating standpoint of actually doing work. So all I'm suggesting is maybe we raise them $2 a piece. And the same thing with other fees, just a couple of percent, nothing huge. But if, we seem to have a tendency as a city, we wait, and then we jump them 10%. And then people really do get mad. And I just think a small increase, a couple of dollars is not a big deal. But all of a sudden, if a couple of dollars become 10, then it becomes not real nice for a lot of people. So all I'm suggesting is we just have some minor increases, nothing major, no backbreakers, but just a little bit. Because, again, we haven't raised the city stickers in a couple of years, and I'm not saying we should raise them a lot, but if we leave them still at 30, we all know we need money for streets. I know we can't do it all on stickers, and I'm not suggesting we do. But I think to get a few more dollars every year off of something that we all know people's cars go down our roads. I just think that it's a wise way to go. People may not agree with me, but I just think it's simple. Again, not a huge increase, just a small incremental one. And the same thing with building fees. Again, nothing major, 1 or 2%, even them off again, I don't know, whatever you want to do, but just a buck or two here and there, I think just keeps us up with inflation. Opinion.
Then unless anybody on the council wants to bite, we'll consider that an intention for right now.
That's fine.
Any other intentions that folks wish to express or discussions they'd like to have this evening regarding the budget? Can be anything that falls under the umbrella. All right, then seeing none, as far as the staff is concerned, is that sufficient for number one?
Yes,
Thank you.
and you will see the, obviously, in a week, we do have hearings starting with this, and it will show the 4.8.
Correct. Thank you, sir. So as we go to number two, then, it's not entirely unrelated. This is also a discussion that's been continuing a piece at a time. That's why I believe the Roman numeral 4 is right there at the end. So for Street Program 2017, I see Mr. Vogt coming to the podium. Mr. Krumstock, do you have a kickoff before we turn it to Mr. Vogt?
No, because I could be cynical and just say it's back again. But we've been trying to do this all in logical pieces. And again, with the 2017 budget, we do have some money in here. But obviously, what we're asking for is this discussion. And then obviously, the council has already approved pieces for the 2017 to continue on. So with that.
Then apparently the answer was actually yes. So, Mr. Vogt, the microphone is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And Part 4 follows Part 3, which was in August. And at that meeting, we said we would plan to bring the proposed locations and the engineering services costs to council tonight, and that's what we have for you. The listings for resurfacing are provided herein: Cardinal Drive, Owl to Campbell, Fremont Street, 2 sections, Rowling to Cardinal, and then Rowling to Theta Lane, Piper Court, Dove Street from Park to Campbell, and then some related storm sewer improvements that come out of the utilities fund. This is estimated to be just under $900,000, which is the target. The city engineer has provided us a proposal earlier this week. We look for that, expect that to be in the $30,000 to $35,000 range for all of the design work, field survey, assembly of plans and specifications. The reconstruction, which is 3 street sections, part of Arlingdale Drive, part of all of Arlingdale Court, and a portion of Highland Drive, comes out just under $800,000. We expect those engineering costs to be around $40,000. That's a little bit more technical needs. The plan assembly and the like requires a greater effort to do that, which is why those costs will be a little bit higher. The plan is, if council concurs with these locations and these costs in particular, to bring the engineering services proposals to the city council next week at the regular council meeting, so that we can start that work during the months of October, November, and stay on our schedule of getting these plans out to contract bid in January with award in February or March. So any questions or comments, be glad to take them.
So then, in other words, from my reading of the packet and from your comments, this is what will be brought forward unless the council desires to make changes that they would signal right here, right now.
Correct. This is based on previous direction and discussions.
Fair enough. Then questions or comments around the table. Mr. Judd.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I got a few questions that so that I understand. Most of it says here civil engineering field survey designs, plans, and specs, 30 to 35 for resurfacing and 38 to 43 for reconstruction. But correct me if I'm right or wrong, is that so if we spend $886,000, are we going to spend $35,000 in engineering? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
But correct me if I'm right or wrong, most of the time we've been looking at around a 10 or 12% number. That's $88,000 to $90,000. But now we're going to do a third of that? Can you just tell me if that makes sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. I'm just trying to figure out if I missed something.
It makes sense to approximately 50%. This is the design aspect to get all of the field survey, road conditions, pavement cores, plan specifications, everything ready to bid. Once we have bids, and once we award a contract, the city engineer will give us a proposal in late winter or early spring to do the actual field observation, which would probably be similar to $35,000 to do that work out in the field. So the engineering is always done, or we have done it over the years, recent years, in two parts.
Right, so there's roughly another 80,000 onto the numbers you're giving us.
That's what we would expect, yes.
Okay, and then, it looks like all of these are in Ward 3, if I'm correcting that. Is it cheaper to do everything in like one area? In other words, everything in Ward 3 versus like a street in Ward 3, a street in Ward 4, and a street in Ward 6? Is it cheaper if they're all relatively close to each other? Do people give us better pricing from engineering and, now you don't have the trucks driving all over the place? Is it cheaper to do it that way, or is that kind of how you try to do it?
I have nothing that can verify or quantify that, but that is kind of the rule of thumb, and we have seen better prices than we expect when we stay geographically tight. It's less mobilization and moving for the contractors to do it in a more regional manner.
Right, that would make sense. I'm just asking. And then it says note that Dove Street has replaced Park Street from previous proposed listing of street resurfacing, but then it says Park Street surfacing will be moved to a future year. Would you not just put that in whatever year Dove Street was? In other words, if Dove was in 19, are you just putting Park in 19? Or if Dove was supposed to be in 18 and you moved it a year, would you just not replace Park with the other year? Or do you have to tie it in kind of? That's what I was asking, if the geographic area makes sense, if you're going to kind of bounce it to maybe to 20 because that's the next time you'll be in that Ward 3-ish area. Is that why you kind of phrase it that way?
Yes, I certainly don't want to commit to necessarily it being the following year. And using the 2010 last version of the street condition assessment and kind of doing projections, staff had identified Park Street over Dove Street in terms of what we expected its condition to be. But going out this summer and looking at street conditions, from a public works standpoint, Dove Street has had far more patching done to it than Park Street has, and is in a worse condition than Park Street. So I would expect Park Street may be 2 or 3 years before it comes back up, which may lend itself well to the next cycle within Ward 3 to do other streets in that area.
Okay, and then the last question I have is, and I don't expect you to know this off the top of your head, but if you can give me just an idea. You've got Piper Court and Arlingdale Court. Are they roughly the same size?
Piper Court, I believe, is a little bit longer in length than Arlingdale Court.
I mean, the only reason I ask is because you've got to resurface Piper's 33.5, to reconstruct Arlingdale's 45.5. I mean, it almost sounds to me like, we'd be better off spending the extra, if it's an extra $20,000 and just reconstruct Piper's compared to resurface it and then turn around and 8 years from now resurface it again or whatever. Why not? Depending on how big the difference is, I don't know. I don't expect you to know off the top of your head, but I mean,
Arlingdale Court is 5 houses.
Okay, do you know Piper Court? I don't know. I mean, I'm just wondering if it'd make more sense to just reconstruct if it's relatively the same.
Mr. Vogt.
We can look at that, given that you're asking that question. It really will depend on, one, I don't know what the length of each is to compare, but the condition of Piper Court, if it's really only warranted for resurfacing from the standpoint of its base is still good, then there really wouldn't be a need to reconstruct it. It's a very low traffic volume street, obviously, because it's a court. But your point is well taken, and we can certainly look at that based on what the condition of Piper Court is.
Okay, no worries. I don't really have anything else, so thank you.
Mr. Cannon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Fred, a couple questions. On the rebuilding down below, your civil engineering field, so are we doing cores again for that? I mean, you're pretty comfortable with what's underneath there right now, right?
We know what's underneath the streets out in the Arlingdale area. They're all pozzolanic base.
Okay. So I guess the sister question of that is, going forward, like my street was cored a couple years ago, so it won't have to be done again. But are we staying ahead with cores? Like, are you doing cores for potential streets next, not 17, but like 18 and 19? Or just backing off on that for right now?
Our plan is to do that to get ourselves ahead, trusting that what council direction has been last year and this year to commit to a certain amount of funding for each, that we can then get ahead with that and make better decisions early on.
Great. I guess the last question I would ask is just, I would ask consideration, if our numbers come in better than we expect, then maybe you could just go farther down Arlingdale Drive with the reconstruction, just to make it farther. If we, like say we save $75,000, do 75 grand worth of work, because it's all engineered already.
That would be a decision we would look
I'm just
to bring
asking
back
for
to council at the
okay.
time that we get
Just a
pricing.
consideration.
Yeah, much like this year when we got more favorable than expected prices on resurfacing, we added a couple of street sections. We could certainly do that with the reconstruction and or do that with the resurfacing when we get those bids opened.
Okay, thanks.
Further discussion of this item? Mr. Veenbos.
I'm fine with the plan, okay? So when the rubber hits the road will be when you get your quotes back in February, is that right?
That's our target, is late January or February.
Okay, and that's when you bring them back to us, and we'll know to this plan, plus or minus where we're at.
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
Further discussion? Then may I simply ask, is there any objection at all for this plan being brought forward by the staff? Then seeing no objection, I think that's staff direction for this item. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving to number 3, the 911 fund balance policy. This is the next, I guess, in a string of fund balance policies that we're rolling out when we're able to. So, Mr. Crumstock.
You get me as the intro. Keeping with our commitment to the auditors and to the city council, obviously to the auditors, we've told them that we're getting ourselves right, but at the same point in time, we already have a general fund balance policy. We have the refuse fund policy. And now what you see in front of you is the 911 fund balance policy. Before you is a discussion, obviously, because we feel comfortable that we can bring this one back. But at the same point in time, the discussion and recommendation is to have the policy ready for the September 27th meeting, if we can. The reason that we're trying to do that is make sure that by the end of this year, we do have this fund policy actually in place, so when we do sit with the auditors. It also does set it up, we feel very comfortable with this budget now. We did have last week a Northwest Central dispatch meeting, and obviously what we did early in the year after the CAFR was done, moving the money, we know when, late 2018, we will be making that payment for the work that will be over there. So we do feel comfortable with what we've set up. We believe that we're in a good spot with the 2017 budget. We will have some discussions, and with the 2018 budget, obviously where we feel that we are. So we feel comfortable, and with that, that's my intro to this fund policy.
And if I may interject quickly, our friendly Dan Bernanke says it's 5-0 Cubs, so that never hurts anything. Ms. Gallagher, item number 3.
Good to know the score. Thank you.
What did you say the Sox score was?
The what score? The what score? Ms. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Crumstock. Before you, and I'll just direct your attention to the second page of this attachment, and I don't know what electronic copy that is, but there is a draft policy example, and our intention would be to bring this back as a resolution at the September 27th City Council meeting. In a nutshell, each fund has its own dynamic. And so what works in one fund may not work in another fund, and we have to look at what the dynamics are. The 911 fund typically has, obviously is, you okay?
Nine.
Didn't sound good.
Chief?
I'm still coughing.
I know. Look at him, sit back. Don't get up.
The Northwest Central Dispatch is our primary expenditure that comes out of this fund for our dispatch services. So we have to look at the mix on that part. In a nutshell, we are looking at a coverage ratio for this fund, meaning that this example on the second page will show you that we're looking at a proposed policy to take an unreserved fund balance, also known as unassigned fund balance in the audit world, and ranging it from 1 to 1.5 times of your annual expenditures. So the example that we have in the packet shows that we have about $618,000 for expenditures. we're looking at least keep in the fund $618,000. Now, obviously, your expenditures are going to change year over year, and we will have to review that. Well, that's why we look at a range. Our auditors have always recommended ranges similar to what the general fund has and the refuse fund. And so what the range would be is from 1 to 1.5 times the expenditures. So the 1.5 times would be approximately for 2017, $927,000. That is what we are suggesting as a recommendation. So based on the ending fund balance for the general, or for the 911 fund for 2017, we have an estimated about $1 million in the fund. That would be in range with this draft policy. And so right now we wanted to turn it over to city councils to find any other suggestions or discussion items.
I would just say that I think it's terrific that you guys are keeping us on track, rolling out fund balance policies so that, there was no need to swoop in and do them all at once. There's no need to feel a one-size-fits-all pressure, but that we're taking the deliberate time to examine each fund, figure out what makes sense for each fund, and act accordingly. I think it's terrific that you folks are doing that. Further discussion on this item around the council? Then seeing none, may I ask again, is there any objection to staff bringing forth the fund balance policy for the 911 fund as outlined here in the council action summary? Then seeing no objection, I believe that's what staff can consider direction.
Thank you.
Moving right along, we get down to the number 4 entry marker sign. Mr. Vogt?
Thank you again, Mayor. Back in July at the Committee of the Whole meeting, we had extensive discussions regarding the community events sign, the Gateway Park sign, style of the letters on signs, as well as the entry markers. And Alderman Cannon posed a question a few weeks ago, I believe it was, about what did we decide for the entry markers. Are they to be red brick or are they to be white stone? Looking back at the minutes from the meeting, we didn't find any specific discussion on the entry markers. Staff had put in the packet what was called option 1, which was red brick. Presented the position of the ad hoc committee that there wasn't a firm recommendation on which to favor or which to recommend. From a continuity standpoint, staff felt that the red brick would go better just from a theme because of the existing red brick of this building, of the wall out front, the community event sign that is to be red brick, the Gateway Park wall that's already there that's red brick. But because there wasn't any specific discussion on it, we felt it appropriate to bring it back here to see if the council agreed without so stating specifically with the red brick for the future entry markers. And I'll point out that those aren't planned to start any work on until next year's budget. We're planning to do the community sign yet this year and some of the signage improvements proposed for Gateway Park. But the entry markers are slotted for next year from a financial standpoint. So certainly there doesn't need to be a discussion or a direction, I should say, tonight if that can't be done. If we do get direction, that's great, and we'll just proceed accordingly for next year. But that's really why this is on the agenda, is to determine is red brick preferred or is the white stone preferred, as was discussed, presented with the ad hoc committee and with this committee of the whole back in July.
Then, Mr. Cannon, I believe it would be appropriate to recognize you first if you wish the floor.
I do, thank you.
Certainly.
I guess from where I sit, I'm a little offended that this is even on here. And let me tell you where I'm coming from. A couple of weeks ago, we had some boards sitting up over there, and we were all asked to vote on them. This was not offered as an option. So I was told, get 4 votes, and this is what'll go. I got 4 votes, sent information to Fred and to Barry, and obviously was ignored. I think that's rude. I don't think this should even be discussion tonight. I got the 4 votes for this. We agreed to it. I was told that if I got 4 votes, it'd be done. So all of a sudden now, it's like we never even talked. We never even got the option when we had it up on the wall. And I pointed that out that night when those boards were up there, that that wasn't a fair assessment of what we did. It wasn't even offered as an option.
I would offer you an option. There is a formal motion called object to consideration that does require 2/3 vote, so it would require 5 aldermen to wipe this out and say, I object to considering this item, bring it back some other time. That is a formal motion that could be made, and I
Well,
would
I
not
guess,
object.
Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate that, thank you. I guess I don't understand. What I was asked to do, I did, and it was just ignored. So I'm really confused as to why this was even brought back. I was told that if we had 4 people, we weren't even offered this as an option. I pointed that out as soon as I saw that, because I was a little bit late getting up to the boards that night, and most people had voted already, and most people weren't even aware that it was an option that night. So I was told to do something. I did it. I sent the information to the appropriate parties, I thought. And to the best of my knowledge, that was ignored. So I'm not really sure if what you're telling me that's the way I have to do it. I'm fine with that. I'm really confused as to why we're even at this point.
I understand. I don't think you want to have that discussion here now. I'm suggesting an alternative that could be an appropriate parliamentary maneuver and would ask for backing on the council, and it would require 5. It's not saying red brick or white stone. It's simply if people feel the need to step in and say, makes a good point to me, let's bring it back, they could. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Sure.
All right, then we'll consider that a motion to object to consideration of this item. It is a proper motion, although it hasn't been made before. It does have to start before discussion begins, and since Mr. Cannon was the first speaker, I believe that fits. It simply says we will not allow this to be discussed tonight. It's kind of a way for the council to remove something from the agenda.
Would it be discussed in a future night?
It certainly could, yes. It only wipes it off of this agenda this evening. And I would suggest that if some of these things can be smoothed over, it could be brought back at any other particular meeting at any time. All it does is erase it from tonight's agenda. Mr. Banjer.
So it's not a redo, it's a timeout, and then it can be brought back?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on this motion? Good, because technically it's not debatable, so we can't have any discussion of the motion itself.
Tim would like to raise both hands.
Clarification questions, yes, and then there we go. So the question before the council is, shall the council object to consideration of this item this evening? Those in favor of this motion, it requires 5. Please signify by raising your hands. That is 5 hands. Then, for form's sake, those opposed. That's 2. By a vote of 5 to 2, the council objects to consideration of this item. It will not be discussed this evening. It can be brought back forward, and I suggest that whatever is necessary to be done to do that be done. Mr. Krumstock, those are all the items on the Committee of the Whole agenda. There are no requests to go into closed session. Correct. Therefore, do you see any reason why we can't simply adjourn?
Nope.
Then, without objection, the council will adjourn. Is there any objection? This council is adjourned.